From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
I have asked that my wife and children accompany me, and I have made the military responsible for any damage. I am going unarmed, peacefully, so that Honduras may return to peace and tranquility.
Ousted Honduran President Manuel Zelaya is attempting a risky return home after last month's military coup. The coup regime has threatened to arrest him if he sets foot in the country. We'll go to Honduras to speak with Latin American historian Greg Grandin. Then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton signs an arms deal with India. Is the U.S. escalating the arms race with Pakistan? And outside the United Nations in New York, a 3-day hunger strike is underway to demand the release of all protesters and journalists in Iran.
I think that we should go on and do what we can so that, we can get the others also up. All repressive regimes are afraid of publicity.
Protests are planned in over 100 cities around the world this weekend. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Ousted Honduran President Manuel Zelaya has arrived at a Nicaraguan town just south of the border from Honduras as he plans a second attempt to return home. The Honduran coup regime has threatened to arrest Zelaya if he sets foot in the country. Zelaya has urged soldiers to ignore orders and says he'll try to enter as early as Saturday. We'll have more from Honduras after headlines. Iraqi Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki has suggested the U.S. occupation of Iraq may continue beyond the 2011 deadline for withdrawing troops. Speaking in Washington, Maliki said U.S. forces could stay on to provide, quote, training and support.
Pursuant to the agreement in 2011, the military presence of the Americans will take end in Iraq. Nevertheless, if the Iraqi forces required further training and further support, we shall examine this then at that time based on the needs of Iraq. And I am sure that the prospects and and the desire of such cooperation is found among both parties. Nevertheless, the nature of that relationship, the functions and the amount of forces will be then discussed and re-examined again.
In other Iraq news, details have been revealed on previously undisclosed talks between U.S. officials and militant Iraqi groups earlier this year. Participants say State Department officials met with at least 3 insurgent representatives in Turkey in March and April. The militant leaders reportedly submitted 4 demands: a U.S. apology for the invasion and occupation of Iraq, the release of all prisoners in U.S. custody, a pledge for Iraq's reconstruction, and support for the militants' entry into Iraq's political mainstream. A 3rd round of talks was planned for June, but didn't occur. The United Nations General Assembly has begun debate on a proposal to adopt the so-called responsibility to protect, which would allow nations to use force to prevent genocide and other crimes against vulnerable populations. In remarks before the Assembly, former Australian Foreign Minister Gareth Evans said the Doctrine's acceptance would help prevent genocide.
The core theme is not intervention, but protection. Look at each issue as it arises from the perspective of the victims. The men being killed or about to be killed, the women being or about to be raped, the children dying or about to die of starvation. Look at the responsibility in question as being, above all, a responsibility to prevent.
Critics of responsibility to protect have argued against expanding the grounds for using force beyond those authorized by the UN Charter, which backs military action only in cases of self-defense or under Security Council approval. UN General Assembly President Miguel Descoto-Brockman of Nicaragua said he fears the doctrine could be selectively used to justify Western military action against weaker states.
Recent and painful memories related to the legacy of colonialism give developing countries strong reasons to fear that laudable motives can end up being misused once more to justify arbitrary and selective interventions against the weakest states.
Also speaking critically of the proposal, the linguist and political analyst Noam Chomsky gave the example of U.S.-backed mass killings in Iraq and Gaza to illustrate the political uses of humanitarian intervention.
There was, of course, no thought of applying the principle to the Iraq sanctions administered by the Security Council, condemned as genocidal by the two directors of the Oil for Food program, the respected international diplomats, Dennis Halliday and Hans von Sponeck, both of whom resigned because of their genocidal character. There's no thought today of protection of the people of Gaza. That's another UN responsibility.
Professor Noam Chomsky speaking at the United Nations on Thursday. In Kyrgyzstan, international monitors are accusing President Kurmanbek Bakiev of massive fraud in national elections. Partial results show Bakiev ahead with 85% of the vote. But monitors with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe say the vote has been marred by several irregularities. As voting began, two main opposition candidates dropped out of the race in protest. One of the candidates, Jenishbek Narazhlev, said the vote was a fake.
If you ask any Kyrgyz citizen or people from nearby countries, those who are able to think, they can clearly understand that these elections are being held for the sake of holding elections. They are fake and being conducted just for Bakiev.
The Obama administration has been largely silent on alleged fraud and other abuses in Kyrgyzstan since the Kyrgyz government reversed the closure of a U.S. military base last month. The base has been vital to the U.S. occupation of Afghanistan. In Israel and the occupied territories, the Israeli government has announced the removal of the Palestinian term Nakba from textbooks in Israeli schools. Palestinians refer to Israel's 1948 War of Independence as the Nakba, or catastrophe, since it caused the expulsion of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from their homes and left them without a state. References to the Nakba in Israeli textbooks were first allowed only 2 years ago. Back in the United States, a new study says 91% of more than 200 terrorism cases tried in the U.S. have resulted in convictions. The group Human Rights First says the figures bolster the argument for trying Guantanamo prisoners on U.S. soil since convictions have been so easily won. On Capitol Hill, Senate Democrats say they won't hold a vote on health care reform until after the summer recess. The widely expected move follows weeks of negotiations that have failed to unite Democrats around a cohesive plan. In New Jersey, 3 mayors and 2 state legislators were among 40 people arrested Thursday in a sweeping corruption case. The suspects allegedly took part in a global money laundering scheme that trafficked in items including human organs and contraband goods. Several Jewish rabbis were also jailed for allegedly laundering tens of millions of dollars through charities linked to Israel. FBI agent Wayson Dunn said the betrayal of public office is widespread.
The people that we have arrested today include mayors, deputy mayors, New Jersey state assemblymen, city councilmen, city council candidates, and a variety of other public officials ranging from commissioners to regulatory inspectors, and of course, a number of rabbis from the Jewish community. The list of people we arrested sounds like it should be the roster for a meeting of community leaders. But sadly, they weren't meeting in a boardroom this morning. They were in the FBI booking room.
In Massachusetts, the Cambridge police officer who arrested the leading African-American scholar, Henry Louis Gates, Jr., last week is refusing to apologize. Gates was detained in his home after he forced his way in to overcome a jammed front door. A neighbor had called the police thinking Gates was a robber. Gates reportedly presented his proof of residence and said this is what happens to black men in America. He was then handcuffed and taken into custody. Cambridge police have dropped a disorderly conduct charge against him, but the officer, Sergeant James Crowley, has rejected Gates' call for an apology. On Thursday, Crowley said Gates had provoked him and that an apology would, quote, never come. Gates, meanwhile, appeared on CNN, where he said the experience has sensitized him to the vulnerability of people of color to racial profiling.
But what it made me realize was how vulnerable all black men are, how vulnerable all people of color are, and all poor people to capricious forces like a rogue policeman. And this man clearly was a rogue policeman.
The Cambridge Police Department has backed Crowley's refusal to apologize and criticized President Obama for saying they had, quote, acted stupidly. Obama responded Thursday in an interview with ABC News.
I have to say I'm surprised by the controversy surrounding my statement because I think it was a pretty straightforward commentary that you probably don't need to handcuff a guy, a middle-aged man.